Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. I see I have my little chat open and I can see who's here. So, hello. Thank you so much for coming. I wanted to share a little bit about a study that I did. This was back in the fall of 2019. So, my presentation is entitled Building Community Through World Music. So, this was a general education class that I taught that was also cross-listed with a music major class. So the music major class was upper level and the gen ed was for 100 level non-majors. So just to kind of get into where my inspiration for this study came from, one of the most influential courses that I took at the University of Miami had to do with community psychology. And it was taught by Isaac Prilatensky. Worked hard to learn how to say his last name. And he's currently the Dean of the School of Education and Human Development. He's also Vice Provost for Institutional Culture at the University of Miami. And some of his research really started digging into, as you can see from this book, how we use humor to work through well-being, how it can support our well-being. And in this class of community psychology that I took, what it really helped me learn was how I can do things to help support my own well-being, but also be a contributing member of my community through social justice and how those two can work together. So when I started teaching at University of Wisconsin Parkside, they wanted me to teach a world music class. And I was super excited because my background is general music. I taught elementary general music, and world music is infused in a lot of what we do at the general music level. So I was very excited about it. And I was a little unsure how to do this as a cross-listed class, knowing I had music majors in there with non-majors. So I've done a lot of reading on what the phenomenon of world music is, because it's kind of a sticky title. It's just it's like saying popular music, and then you're like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? So Shippers, he defines this as the phenomenon of musical concepts, repertoires, genre styles, and instruments traveling, establishing themselves, or mixing in new cultural environments. And I really love that idea of world music traveling and mixing in new cultural environments. I thought that's cool. The picture that you see on the slide right here, this is Anushka Shankar. She's Ravi Shankar's daughter, one of them. And music from India, for example, and Ravi Shankar, I mean, there's connections to the Beatles, and then there's connections to Norah Jones over here in the United States, who's also one of his daughters. So I thought that was really interesting, these cross-cultural connections that happen as world music kind of travels around. But the thing that I found intriguing was James Banks. He wrote he wrote many things, but in one of his books, Multicultural Education Issues and Perspectives, he talks about the ways in which multicultural content can be integrated into curriculum. And he has these different levels. And at what I was thinking in terms of like a world music class in higher education, if you're just kind of doing a survey and you're going and you're like, okay, we're going to do the music of India, and now we're going to travel over to China, and now we're going to travel over to Japan, it's almost like an additive approach because you're doing this survey and you're not really digging in. And I understand that the nature of the content kind of is set up like that, but I kind of thought I feel like we can do better, especially, in our current climate, which seems to have more emphasis now more than ever. So my goal with this world music class is I wanted to take what I felt was kind of starting at an additive approach level 2 and see if we can kind of work up a little bit more, maybe to a transformation approach where students can maybe empathize more, have more compassion for others, or perhaps a social action approach where they can see themselves as being as being able to affect change in a positive way in the world. So I designed this study. The purpose of the study was to examine how an undergraduate world music class utilizes traditional and popular music and social justice to build community within the college classroom. So these were my 3 research questions. I'll give you a moment to read those. And moving on, when I was designing the course content for this, I was kind of like, okay, how am I going to do this? Because there's a lot of ground that I need to cover. So I needed some frameworks to kind of help me out with developing content. So some of the things that I looked to develop course content was Juliet Hess's recent publication, Music Education for Social Change. Particularly, she has a trifaceted pedagogical approach for future activism. And the 3 things that she talks about is a pedagogy of community, a pedagogy of expression, and a pedagogy of noticing. And since my study was revolved around community, I really attached or latched on to the idea of the pedagogy of community. And so I really kind of dug in there, that section of her book, to kind of help guide the things that I was going to do in the classroom. And then the other thing that helped me was Sheila Woodward's chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Social Justice and Music Education. And in her particular chapter, she has these great headings of different categories like music as identity and music as resistance to oppression and music as storytelling. And I thought, aha, I have a framework now. So I can kind of have these categories to kind of help guide my conversations and the artists that I choose and things of that nature. So the class itself, this is kind of the things that we did. In the very beginning of the class, we had, and in the beginning, I mean, kind of like the first month and a half or so, these were some of our activities that we did. I really emphasized the importance of using each other's names in the class. We had a My Musical Culture assignment where I asked them to select 3 songs that they feel really epitomizes their own musical culture, and they wrote a paper about it. And that allowed me to learn more about their musical preferences, and also to kind of help them think about, well, what is my musical culture? You know, it's not something people often think about as a default. So that kind of helped me understand my students better. And we did bonding and bridging conversations where we talked about when you're in a group of people where there's for example, the music majors, that's a core group and they already knew each other. So there was a lot of bonding going on. But what I really wanted to do was to have things where there was a lot of bridging as well, where maybe they're talking to another student that's a freshman and a non-major, and really start to see the world of music through their eyes. Especially I had teachers in that class, or pre-service teachers. So I thought it was important for them to recognize that perspective. So as far as the repertoire that we chose and the artists that we chose genres and artists and collaborations that allowed us to discuss those topics. So that's where Woodward's chapter really helped me with having some guidance there. So like music as storytelling and things like that. If we were discussing corridos, we would use Calibre 50 and talk about immigration. Or, for example, one of my students, one of the songs that he felt represented his musical culture, musical identity, was the song Man in the Mirror. So we kind of were able to talk a little bit about that. Not something that you would typically find, I imagine, in a undergraduate world music class. But, again, I really wanted to have this as a connecting thing and to help, move up our levels according to Banks in our levels of integrating multicultural content. And I also had a brainstorm with the class on social justice topics that were important to them, so that I could foster some small group conversations with them. So some of the topics that they chose were close to their hearts were the idea of disability, or what rights are essential rights for everybody in the world. So that allowed me to kind of think about content to create that would foster those conversations. So, as far as participants of the study, I had 38 students total in this class. 19 students consented to participate, and 14 provided me with usable data. So, as we know, undergraduate students, sometimes they have really strong ideas in the beginning and then they kind of fall off. So there was some data that I wasn't able to use by the end because I wasn't able to track it and compare it. So out of those 14 participants, 6 of them were music majors, 8 were non-majors. And the course content was pretty much the same for both levels of students, except I had an extra presentation for the music majors at the end, which is important to remember, and a little foreshadowing into when we get into data analysis. So what I did a pre-test, post-test of a measure I found called the Sense of Classroom Community Index. And the pretest, obviously, beginning of the semester, post-test was at the end. We probably had maybe a couple weeks of class already before I sent out that pretest. And then I had 4 journal prompts that I gave them throughout the semester as well. And the journal prompts were things that were kind of connected to the research questions. So, for example, in what ways do our classroom discussions, music assignments connect you to others inside our world music classroom, and things of that nature. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like, this was the pre-test, post-test. This was the Sense of Classroom Community Index. It's a Likert scale. There's 40 items on it, and the highest score you can receive is 160. And the questions are categorized into subcategories, so spirit, trust, interaction, and learning. So the highest score you can receive out of that one is going to be 40. So moving along, data analysis. For the pre-test, post-test, I did a repeated measures ANOVA in SPSS, and then I did some qualitative coding with preliminary themes. I say preliminary themes and emerging themes because I'm still in the process of data analysis with that. I want to spend some time to really kind of engage and see what's emerging, but I can share some of that with you today of what's happening. So on to the data analysis. So what you're looking at right now is the pre-test, post-test score comparisons. Remember, that's out of 160. So on the left-hand side, we have the non-majors, their pre-test, post-test scores. And on the right-hand side, we see the music majors. So if you're probably like me, you look at the music majors and you're like, okay, their beginning pre-test mean was 130 and their post-test mean was 98.5. Oh my goodness, what happened? So I did a little bit further analysis going on there, and I found that I was curious about the interaction between the two, because we can see that the post-test score went up a little bit for the non-majors, but as you can see, not so much, quite the opposite for the music majors. And I did found there was a significant interaction effect found between the two sections, between the sections, music major and non-major, and the time, pre-test, post-test. So further analysis revealed some other statistically significant interactions between spirit. So we can see something was going on there with spirit. We saw some things going on with interaction as well, and something going on with learning. Interestingly, I didn't see any statistically significant interaction effect for the category of trust. And yeah, so I want to dig a little bit more into this. So further analysis revealed that there was a statistically significant increase in spirit when it came to the non-majors. So spirit, as defined by this Classroom Community Index, it's the students' sense of community, it's their sense of friendship, their sense of cohesion and bonding that they feel in the class. So that increased from their pre-test to their post-test. So I thought, okay, that's good. Still, again, concerned for my music majors. So, and here's where I found some disheartening, statistically significant decreases with the music majors. So their sense of interaction decreased, their sense of learning decreased in the post-test. So interaction refers to, according to the Classroom Community Index, it refers to the task-driven assignments that you give, and it also refers to the socio-emotional learning that happens for constructive conversations. So they felt a decreased sense in those things. And learning also refers to their commitment to their common educational purpose and their attitudes towards their quality of learning. So that went down too. So what on earth happened? So I thought, okay, as far as the non-majors and their increased sense of spirit, I thought, okay, well, they don't know each other. So it would make sense that a world music class that is focused on community building and focused on social justice, that makes sense that their spirit would increase and they would feel an overall sense of community. For the music majors, however, they already knew each other. In fact, many of them were juniors, perhaps seniors. So they were with each other, they were already singing in ensembles, and they were put in this class where they're mixed, they were outnumbered by non-majors. So that was part of what I was thinking. And then also when I thought about their decrease in interaction and their decrease in learning, remember how I was giving you foreshadowing about how there was that extra assignment at the end? Well, put it simply, my hypothesis, I think I pissed off my music majors. and I think what ended up happening was, even though I had that extra assignment in the syllabus, and I told them throughout the semester, this is coming, you might want to think about, as you were learning and talking about things in this class, think about what you want to do for your final assignment that's at the end. When I recall, when the rubber met the road and I was like, okay, guys, what are we going to do with this? They were, what assignment? I had no idea. I wish we knew this sooner. And they were quite honestly pissed off at me. So at the time that this post-test went out, I believe it was around that time. So I have a suspicion that perhaps the reason why they feel this decrease in interaction, which has to do with tasks and assignments, and decrease in learning, I have a feeling that perhaps what ended up happening was in connection to that assignment and them feeling like they were being treated unfairly. So learned my lesson about when I start engaging in those conversations in the semester. So moving on with the qualitative analysis with emerging themes. So some of the themes that are emerging through the analysis of the journal prompts are identity, mindset, and connection, which not surprising, I suppose. So in terms of identity, what I thought was really interesting is students through conversations could really see themselves reflected in what others were talking about and in their hardships. They reflected that they started to feel a better understanding of themselves and how they cope with things and how they use music to cope with things. Interestingly enough, when we were having a conversation about equal rights, one student reflected that they're happy that, they're in a country that is working to be more inclusive, but they also said that it's at the risk of perhaps losing the country's identity. So I thought that was a fascinating thing to be said there. And if I were at a point where I would be able to kind of probe more thinking in that, I would want to know more information from that student. But all of this was done after I had the class. That was part of me getting a IRB approval. So I didn't see any of this data until afterwards. Mindset was another emerging theme. So they talked a lot about how they felt like they were being more open-minded to others in the classroom. They talked like they were being more open to listening to different types of music. They also started recognizing that they weren't as open-minded as they thought. So they would always, not they would always, but some of the participants talked about, how they thought, oh, I thought that I was actually, open-minded in my music that I listen to and the friends that I have. But this class really helped me kind of see that I'm not, and I want to work to be a little bit more open-minded with that. And the final theme that I'm seeing as emerging is connection. So they started to feel, as the class went on, And again, this is through the qualitative information, so not from what we just saw on the sense of classroom community index. So they started to see, they were feeling more connected. Like, say, for example, I had a guest presenter come in and share some spoken word poetry while he played the talking drum. They felt connection there. They expressed also feeling more connected to others on campus. One student in particular reflected that they lived on campus and they never really used to kind of notice others, and they started to notice people more and the diversity of the campus. And Parkside is known as the most diverse of the campuses out of the UW system. So I thought, okay, all right, so that's something. So as far as my research questions go, for the first research question, I feel that the answer lies somewhere in understanding the experiences of the two sections. So for non-majors, it seems like they can experience an increase in sense of community when we have classes that are focused on these things, especially as it relates to spirit and perhaps just, how this can happen when they don't know others. For the music majors, however, their sense of overall classroom community decreased, especially as it relates to their interactions with assignments in the class and others and learning. So again, my hypothesis was that might have been due to them feeling like they were being treated unfairly. So the next time I'm teaching a class that has a section, an overlapping section, I'm definitely going to be aware of that and cognizant about when I'm assigning things and not overly stressing out my students. So for the second and third research questions, I'm still, again, in the process of digging deeper into that analysis, but some preliminary themes I think can help answer those questions. So it appears that they do, in fact, feel connected with social, cultural, and social political issues when they're able to connect with others. So a lot of the assignments that we did where they were talking to one another and they were in small group discussions, they really, really found that their mindsets were being challenged. And they also felt like they could see themselves reflected in others and what they're saying. So if I were to, for next steps for this, I feel like my next steps for this would be to, I'd like to obviously spend more time with the qualitative data. I'm also curious to go back in and look and see, look at the music majors and their journal responses specifically, and look and see if perhaps the ways in which they responded would kind of illuminate something different towards their sense of classroom community within there. So I just did a whole lot of talking. So I'm going to go into the chat and I'm seeing lots of positive things. Oh, thank you, everybody. So I'm wondering, I want to give some time if anybody has any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to share, anything that you noticed. And I think I even put a setting in there where you could actually request to speak. So I don't know if anybody knows how to find that, but I think I allowed that setting. Okay, well, I guess this is, I'm not seeing anything going on there. But I suppose what I'll just say then is I'll close out this session saying thank you so much for coming. And I hope that everybody is having a wonderful conference, that you're doing well, you're staying safe. And I hope that you're finding support within your own communities, because I know that that can be really, really challenging for us right now. So take care of everyone, and thank you so much for attending. Bye.